Tonight, in the trial of Oscar Pistorius, another difficult day in court for his defence.
Whatever the accused is saying, you say he's wrong.
An expert's admission as he examines the athlete's prosthetic leg.
The first time I've seen the prosthesis was when I came into court.
You know, Mr. Dixon, I don't understand it.
Good evening from Church Square in the heart of Pretoria's legal district, just a few yards away from the courthouse where the Oscar Pistorius murder trial has just come to the end of its 7th week. And it's been another difficult day in court for the athlete's case because of the tough cross-examination of one of the key defence witnesses. Now, the forensic tests carried out by Roger Dixon were so rigorously challenged by Mr. Nell, the prosecutor, that Mr. Dixon actually took to social media to defend his reputation. And he went on to what appeared to be to contradict some of Mr. Pistorius' own evidence. And later Mr. Dixon actually had to apologise for misleading the court. Well, the court has now adjourned for the Easter break. They'll be back on May the 5th. Lisa Holland has the story of the day in court.
His supporters have been unswerving in their loyalty.
Oscar, I love you. I love you. I love you. You're my hero.
But for Oscar Pistorius, inside court, it's a different story. Yesterday, the authority of his key defence witness was undermined. Returning for a second day on the stand, Roger Dixon faced prosecutor Harry Nell, who instantly went on the attack.
Talking about records, do you keep a case file system as well? With cases that you work on as an expert?
My lady, since I left the Forensic Science Laboratory of the South African Police, this was the very first case I'd been approached.
The forensic scientist said he had reconstructed the night of Reva Steenkamp's death. She was killed by Oscar Pistorius at his Pretoria home on Valentine's Day last year. Mr. Dixon was asked about the location of a magazine rack in the bathroom toilet.
The magazine rack, did it play any role as far as the head wound is concerned?
In the reconstruction as we did it, my lady, memory is a fleeting thing.
This was his analysis of what happened when the athlete fired 4 shots through the toilet door.
She is standing with her arm towards the door handle. Whether she is coming back from having locked the door or going forward, I don't know. Standing like that, most probably leaning slightly forward. The first bullet goes into the hip, and it goes fairly. There was minimal deflection, according to the ballistic report. It went in, according to Simon, just straight in like that, not deviating. So, for that to happen, she was at a slight angle to the door. She wasn't standing facing the door. And then as the impact of the bullet broke the hip and she lost voluntary control, she's unstable on one leg. She cannot use the right leg to move, so she's collapsing. The second shot, as she's going down, hits the arm, and that, because she's unstable, she carries on falling, and you fall backwards.
Later, the forensic expert recollected his theory on the role of the magazine rack.
What I can read from the pool of blood, which is on the bleeding was from the right side of the body. The body would have been slightly towards, if the toilet is there, slightly to that side, between the front of the toilet and the back of the wall, with the magazine rack behind her.
Mr. Dixon was called as a witness for the defence. The prosecution said his account contradicted the defendant, Oscar Pistorius.
On your reconstruction, having fallen on the magazine rack, the furthest point of the magazine rack from the toilet, that's what you said. And that caused the bruise of the buttocks. And from that position, she must have then fallen forward towards the toilet bowl.
That is my interpretation, my lady.
Then one would expect the magazine rack to be there.
That is so, my lady.
The accused said to this court, definitely wasn't there. Are you giving a version that's against the accused's version?
My lady, my reconstruction of the events in that toilet are based on the evidence that I can see and measure and that has been recorded by other people.
So what you're saying, let me just get that, whatever the accused is saying, you say he's wrong.
My lady, I am giving testimony on what I observe and interpret. I am not saying that anybody else is right or wrong.
Can the accused be right if you're right? He said the magazine rack was definitely not there. Then he must be wrong. You, his witness.
The scientist was handed photos he took at the reconstruction to try to establish how visible Oscar Pistorius would have been through the bathroom window.
What we are seeing here is a person on their knees. Mr. Pistorius is slightly taller on his stumps because he has an extension below the knee. And my understanding of his height, his head would be maybe, the top of his head might be about 20 centimeters higher than the top of this person's head.
So I don't have to carry on with this cross-examination. What we see on 2.7 is not a reflection of the deceased, how visible the accused would have been on his prosthesis, without his prosthesis. Am I right? This is not.
Is this the picture? No.
He would have been higher. There
He would have been a little bit higher,
20
my lady.
centimeters, you said.
Approximately, my lady.
Yes. We're talking to an expert, Mr. Dixon. You're giving a court an indication of how much of the accused would have been visible if he was on his stumps. Then you give us a photograph that does not reflect that. Why would you hand in that photograph or even take that photograph?
I am not trying to mislead the court, my lady.
That's what I'm testing. You mentioned the word misleading. What I don't understand is, if that is what you wanted to point out, why would you not ensure that the person on his knees stands on something, is lifted to scale? Because you're an expert. Why wouldn't you make sure that his height is exactly the height of Mr. Pistorius on his stumps? Why would you not do that?
My lady, it is something I omitted. I overlooked it at the time.
Mr. Dixon's methods were once again attacked by prosecutor Harry Nell.
The defence team would ask you to go there, come back with a report. You have to explain to the court what you saw there. Why would you not make notes? Why would you not come with a report? Or do you want the court to accept only what Mr. Dixon is saying?
My lady, I had been there previously when there was no moon, when we were doing these tests, outside lighting tests, and when the curtains were closed and it was pitch black. We couldn't see anything.
You know what the state's case is? That the curtains were open. You did not even take that into account. But you didn't.
My lady, I must say I most probably am not like most of the rest of the world. I do not have a television set. I do not have a radio at my home. After the first few days, I haven't been listening on the radio either. I do not buy newspapers. So I have not been following the case like that. I have my testimony to present. And in my experience, I don't like to be influenced by external factors. So I do not know all the details of the state's case.
Then another stumble for the witness.
And the balcony light?
The balcony light was off, my lady.
Now, you see, the version is that even of the accused is that the balcony light was on.
Before his evidence came to a close, as he inspected the athlete's prosthetic leg, there was an embarrassing admission.
Will you just identify for yourself, is that the prosthesis that the portion was cut out from?
It would appear so, my lady.
Why would you say it would appear
It's
so?
covered with a sock. I've only seen photographs that are underneath without the sock.
You've never seen the prosthesis in like you're seeing them now, only photographs of it?
Yes, my lady. The first time I've seen the prosthesis was when I came into court.
My lady, I have no further questions.
So, the end of week 7 in the Oscar Pistorius murder trial, and as we head into a 2-week Easter break, time to chew over what's been happening today, particularly in court, and maybe over the last week as well. I'm joined by Alex Crawford, our correspondent in court, by Kathy Motloklana, who's from ENCA News here in South Africa, and Martin Hood, who's been helping us out as a legal analyst over the last few days. Very good to see you all. Alex, another curious day in court. What did you make of it all?
Well, by the end of the day, you started to feel a little bit sorry for the defence forensic geologist, Roger Dixon, because he had such a mauling by Gerry Nel, the prosecutor, and it was very difficult for him to come back from that. For a start, he had to apologise twice to the court before morning tea break about what he described unintentionally misleading the judge. I mean, that must be pretty unprecedented in itself, that, you know, a defence witness having to make this humiliating apology. And then another thing was he told Gerry Nel that, unlike a lot of other people, he did not own a television, he did not have a radio in his house, he did not read newspapers, he was trying to keep himself separate from the goings-on in the trial. And at the same time, the reporters were Googling and finding out he had a Facebook page on which he detailed lots of what had happened yesterday in court, and he had actually tweeted some of the South African journalists who were covering aspects of the trial. So a lot of things didn't add up, and he was very much taken to task. He seemed totally unprepared for Gerry Nel's grilling. He didn't bring key bits of evidence. He didn't bring official notes. He had scrappy bits of notes and seemed to be relying a lot on his memory. And at one stage actually said, oh, memory is a terrible thing. You know, it's like, oh dear, and you are on the witness box. You've got to remember this stuff. And Gerry Nel just wasn't letting him get away with it.
What did you make of it, Kathy? It was a bit of a strange day, wasn't it?
Well, I think, Alex is absolutely right. Towards the end there, you couldn't help but feel sorry for him, particularly because the way that he was responding to the cross-examination, now making it very clear that I'm going to question your integrity and I'm going to question your credibility. And that's in essence what he did, because by the time that he was done with him on that stand, whatever came out of his mouth, you found it hard to believe, simply because of the careless nature in which they conducted their evidence, and the fact that they didn't even go as far as applying the same variables of recreating the scene, not using the right time frames, not using the right height measurements. All of that really adding to the credibility. And I think, where they're trying to go with this, the prosecution, that is, in undermining his credibilities, at the end, they don't want his evidence to be admissible before Judge Masipa. And if Gerry Nel can do as much as he can to get this evidence kicked out of court, of course, it's going to be a win for the state, because they'll just have to consider what the state experts have put before them. And the state experts' evidence, it has been very, very strong, particularly from the ballistic experts and from the pathologists. And what Dixon has done, I don't think, has been enough to actually disqualify their credibility.
On the way out of court, I noticed one or two of you managed to throw a question at Mr. Dixon.
And he thought that today was an absolute breeze.
In his own words.
Exactly. He was glad that it was over, and he felt that he handled it incredibly well. Again, you're not sure about whether or not he has a real sense of, the potential damage he could have done to the defense's case. Looking also at elements of where he contradicted Pistorius's case on where the magazine rack was in the toilet or so. Certainly, he's left a lot more issues for the defense than answered questions for them.
Martin Hood, you're a defense lawyer. Is he the sort of witness that you would have called?
No, and I think that what we have seen is an issue of a lack of preparedness, because Gerrie Nel has established through this trial his reputation for being thorough. The defense knew before they put their first witness on the stand that Gerrie Nel would be prepared, and he would go through their stories using the exhibits and the evidence, and he would test them thoroughly. All defense attorneys know that when you put your witnesses in the box, you've got to know how they respond. You've got to know not only what they are going to say, but how they are going to say it. And you don't put bad witnesses in the box, and you put your best witnesses first. If what we have so far is the defense's best witnesses, there's a problem here, because Dixon just came across as someone that was not prepared. He did not read the documents. He misled the court. He apologized for misleading the court. He gave expert evidence, so-called, in areas where he's not an expert. And if I was sitting there as the defense team, my toes would be curling. I would be very, very uncomfortable with this situation.
I know one of the things that Alex, you thought was strange, that he was still carrying out tests when the trial had already started, when Oscar Pistorius is already in the witness box, there's Mr. Dixon carrying on doing little experiments.
I was astonished on the first day of his testimony when he said he'd carried out gunshot tests just a week ago. And then today he said he carried out light tests 3 days ago. Now, this is a trial that's taken a year to come to court, and it seems very last minute, them getting all their evidence together at such a late time. And the other thing is that I know for a fact that the prosecution grilled their own state witnesses several times. One of them told me he'd had rehearsals or grilling by Gerrie Nel in preparedness for going into the witness box 4 times.
Looking back over it, how do you think it's gone for the defence?
Well, I think obviously once the defense called on its case, the interest in the case grew even more, particularly everybody waiting to have Oscar Pistorius on the stand. And once he was done, the expectation, I think, was that interest would dwindle a little. But certainly seeing Professor Dixon back in the witness box and the kind of cross-examination that we see now, just, he's great to watch. And I think the public generally are drawn to his style of cross-examination. He's quick, he's sharp, and he certainly doesn't let anything go past him that's said in court. And so, still maybe a bit too early to tell which way it's going, especially because the defense is yet to call more of its expert witnesses. The good thing would be that, of course, none of them are as unprepared as Roger Dixon appeared to be.
Well, let's ask Martin Hood. I mean, that list of defence witnesses, would you be starting to think again if you were Barry Rue? Does he have to re-strategise?
Absolutely. If you have a long list of witnesses and you start out badly, then you need to reconsider your strategy very carefully, because you don't want to worsen the situation. I want to touch upon something that Alex has said, which is quite important, and I'm sure Gerrie Nel is going to raise this, if not with witnesses now in his heads of argument, and that is conducting tests when the trial has actually started. In a way, that actually compromises the integrity of those tests, because the state evidence has already been heard. And you always run the risk that those tests could be coloured inadvertently or deliberately by the evidence that was already being given. And I think
more
that
tailoring, as Mr. Nel calls
yes,
it.
And that, I think, also appears to be yet another tactical mistake on the part of the defence. And I'm pretty sure Gerrie Nel is going to latch on to that.
One thing I know you raised when we've been talking about this before, as a man who's knowledgeable about firearms, has a license, carries a gun, and does a lot of law work on licensing of firearms. You noticed the grouping of the shots in the door, and perhaps have been surprised that more expertise wasn't drawn to that.
Yes. The evidence has been that Oscar was shooting, I think, one-handedly from a position where the gun was at his waist level. And in my experience, and I own more than one firearm, in order to shoot a grip like that, you have to have a very firm grip on the firearm, and normally that grip is with 2 hands. And the fact that the grip is relatively small shows that Oscar knew how to hold the firearm properly, and in all probability, in my view, and if I were called to be an expert, I would say this. He held it with two hands, and he held it very deliberately to get that grouping at that level. And if I were the state, and perhaps it's only fair to be critical of the state as well, if I were the state, I would have called a firearm trainer or a firearm instructor who would have explained how that type of grouping could have resulted. Because when you're holding a firearm with one hand, and you're in that very excited state of mind that Pistorius said that he was in, you're going to have a lot of shake, and you're not going to get such a small group as that. It's going to be all over the place. The fact that it isn't, in my view, suggests that he had far more control than he actually is prepared to admit.
See whether that comes up. Kathy, just moving on to sort of broader, look, as a South African journalist covering this huge trial being watched around the world and here, I mean, how's it going down? What sort of reaction are you getting? It appears the whole country is in the thrall of this case.
Oh, absolutely, and who wouldn't be? Because, you know, everybody, it's unfolding like, you know, the judge always makes reference to this not being entertainment, but it does have some form of entertainment value, just in the sense that it draws people to their screens, draws them to their radios. They're on social networks commenting about what's happening in court. And, you know, one person saying that they've learned so much about how the South African justice system actually works just through observing and watching what's going on in the trial. And I think, you know, it's made the issue of open justice more accessible to South Africans, seeing how the defense and the state actually go head to head with each other, seeing the role that the judge plays in cases. But of course, the one thing to note is that not all murder trials in this country go as speedily as this one has gone. And so ordinarily, I think citizens wouldn't necessarily have this easy access to justice, or at least not as speedily as it has gone, but certainly a lot of interest locally still.
Alex, Kathy and Martin, thank you very much for joining us at the end of week 7. So everybody perhaps has a bit of a sigh of relief and takes 2 weeks off. I hope you'll join us again when the Oscar Pistorius murder trial resumes on May the 5th.